The Forgotten City, where citizens live under a golden rule. If any one of them commits a sin, they will all die. Our protagonists will find themselves living the city's final day again and again, until they find a way to free it from the tyranny of this golden rule. So let's jump in and see what this game is all about. We start in the present day. Our protagonist wakes alongside a river. They meet a stranger named Karen, who identifies the river as being the river Tiber. Karen has pulled the protagonist from the river along with another person named Al Worth. Karen explains that Al has gone into some nearby ruins, and she asks the protagonist to go in and find him. Searching for Al, the protagonist quickly finds a temple whose floor consists of a circular disc. The disc flips when they step upon it, causing them to fall into a dark chamber, deep underground. They emerge into a ruined city, filled with golden statues of men and women in Roman garb, in various postures of terror or despair. Eventually, they come across a gold statue of a man hanging from a noose. Unlike the other statues, he is dressed in modern clothing. A nearby tablet tells them that this is Al Worth, and that he hung himself after failing to find a way to stop the city's destruction. Al Worth's tablet warns the reader not to step through the portal, that it is better to end it all now, rather than experiencing what he did. Not heeding the warning, the protagonist will press on through the ruins until finding another temple with a strange portal within it. They will step through it and be pulled back in time. The protagonist emerges from the portal, having travelled back in time 2,000 years. Leaving the temple, the player is confronted by a Roman man named Galerius, who questions the protagonist on why they were inside the shrine Proserpina. Galerius takes the protagonist to meet the magistrate Sentius. Sentius explains that the protagonist has been sent by the goddess Proserpina to find the person who will be responsible for breaking the golden rule. The protagonist quickly sets off into the city, meeting a number of people until they see a young woman cowering in fear, who warns the protagonist of an assassin. The woman asks the protagonist to do something about the assassin before running into a nearby temple, which immediately collapses on top of her, causing her death. The protagonist confronts the bow-wielding assassin, who is searching for a traitor to the Empire. The assassin attacks the protagonist, triggering a breach of the golden rule. The golden statues through the city come to life and attack the protagonist and the residents with their golden arrows. The whispering voices tell the protagonist to follow the magistrate. The protagonist runs back to the temple of Proserpina to see the magistrate has sacrificed himself to open the portal. The protagonist enters the portal and is returned to the moment they first entered the city. This time the protagonist is able to warn the woman not to enter the temple and instead tricks the assassin to enter it in her place. The roof falls in again, and this time it is the assassin who dies. After retrieving a bow from the dead assassin, the player is offered a deal by a local merchant named Decius. Decius will plate the bow in gold so that the protagonist can switch it with the bow in the shrine Diana. Diana's bow, it turns out, has the power to turn anything to gold. After the protagonist enters the temple, Decius locks the door behind them. Decius offers to unlock the door if the protagonist passes Diana's bow under the door to Decius. Not believing the merchant, the protagonist decides to try and find another way out, and uses the bow to turn a wasp nest to gold, causing it to drop from the ceiling and smash a hole in the floor. Jumping down the hole, the protagonist finds themselves in underground tunnels. The protagonist emerges from the tunnels into the palace, where they are met with peeled statues which attack the player on sight. Diana's bow allows the protagonist to recover these statues in gold, causing them to be immobilized once more. In the heart of the castle, the protagonist finds the person responsible for the half-peeled statues, Navia, the city doctor who has been experimenting with removing the gold from the statues to try and save one particular statue, a woman she has named Galatea. Escaping the castle, the protagonist is now able to turn vines into gold with Diana's bow, and can use this to access the upper cistern. In the upper cistern, they find Scintilla, a young woman who had been reported missing. She has been imprisoned there by her own father, the magistrate Sentius, after finding a way to escape the city. Encountering Scintilla is one way the protagonist can find out that Sentius has retained his memories each time the day is reset. Sentius uses a time loop to achieve immortality and has no intention of allowing the loop to end. The protagonist must find some other way to end the loop themselves in order to return to their own time. Among the residents in the city is a priestess, Equitia. She implores the protagonist to speak to the other people in the city and see if they can find any common threads in their stories. During this investigation, the protagonist will learn that no one in the city knows how they got there. They all have vague memories of being on or near the Tiber, many fleeing towards it to escape the fires of Rome. Many specifically mention having a coin or coins on them and seeing a stranger by the river when they awoke. Discussing these similarities with the priestess leads her to reveal the truth of the city, that it is the underworld. But the woman the protagonist met on the river was not named Karen, but Charon. That she is the ferryman of the dead, and the river itself is the river Styx. The priestess reveals the protagonist may be able to confront the god of the underworld in his temple if they are able to collect 4 plaques and bring them to the obelisk. The 4 plaques consist of a Roman plaque, a Greek plaque, an Egyptian plaque, and a plaque whose origins are unknown. The protagonist is able to obtain the Roman plaque fairly easily, being that it is located within a cultist shrine, easily accessible to the protagonist. To obtain the Greek plaque, the protagonist blackmails wannabe magistrate Malleolus into withdrawing from the election for magistrate by obtaining a letter from his wife confirming that he is the traitor Quintus, the person the assassin had been searching for. The protagonist then nominates Galerius for magistrate and arranges for him to run a series of errands to help various citizens who then vote for him. Galerius' first act as magistrate is to release a simple-minded man named Dooley from a cage Sentius had placed him in to prevent him from breaking the golden rule. Dooley allows the protagonist to take the Greek plaque before immediately wandering off to steal the first shiny object he sees, in turn breaking the golden rule. So it turns out that Sentius was right to keep him locked up. The Egyptian plaque has been taken by the city's Egyptian resident Kabash. He has carried it through catacombs located under the Greek temple. He is more than happy to give it to the protagonist to return it to its rightful place in the obelisk. Unfortunately, Kabash is also in possession of the 4th unknown tablet. This tablet threatens his understanding of his religion and culture. It turns out that the plaque is for the Sumer god Nergal, who predated the Egyptian god Cyrus, and the Egyptians copied and stole from the Sumer culture in the same way Greeks and Romans did to the Egyptians. Kabash throws this plaque into the abyss below rather than allow anyone else to uncover this truth. The protagonist dives after the plaque and after retrieving it finds themselves in the lower level of the underworld, populated by more golden statues. Making their way back to the surface, the player is confronted by Kabash and must convince him to let them pass. Once all 4 plaques are returned to the obelisk, the protagonist is able to enter the temple by entreating the god of the underworld by all 4 names by which he has been known. In a twist, the protagonist finds the god of the underworld sitting on a throne in a spaceship overlooking the Earth. His people had come to Earth 3,000 years ago. Since then, most of his species had grown tired of humans and decided to return home to Elysium. His wife, however, had come to care for humans, and rather than leave Earth, chose instead to give up her immortality to live among them. The god placed Proserpina in suspended animation and begged with Jupiter to bring Proserpina with them back to Elysium. Jupiter refused but proposed a wager, that if a single human city was able to live without sin for 1 year, then Proserpina and all humans would be allowed to come to Elysium. The protagonist either has to talk the god into releasing everyone by persuading him that the wager was flawed, or will need to threaten him with the death of Proserpina by killing her and stealing her crown before going back through the loop again and presenting the crown to him. Either way, the god agrees to end the rule and return everyone to the land of the living. The protagonist is then transported back to the present, where they emerge from the ruined temple of Proserpina to find Al Worth. The player and Al leave the ruined city, and Al leaves a warning to others not to enter. The player confronts Charon and learns that they and Al had died after being murdered by robbers. Charon agrees to ferry them both back to the land of the living. 1 year later, the protagonist is invited to a museum by Al and is surprised to see each of the friendly citizens there. They were all brought to the present day and are adapting to modern life. Proserpina is also there, having been granted a return to her human life. Charon is now in charge of the underworld, and the god of the underworld's whereabouts are unknown. As the protagonist looks down from the museum's balcony, he sees a group of people. These are the golden statues from the city who have all been saved. This, without a doubt, is the intended end to the game and represents the best possible outcome. However, there are 3 alternate endings. If the protagonist had started the game as a soldier, they would have been granted a gun with 10 bullets. The protagonist has the choice to use this gun or to use the bow acquired later in the game to kill Magistrate Sentius. Killing Magistrate Sentius creates a paradox. If Magistrate Sentius dies, he is not able to create the time loop that brings the protagonist to the Forgotten City. In creating this paradox, the player is then returned to the present day. He finds Al Worth in the ruined city and explains what had happened. Al Worth is understandably upset, as both Al Worth and the protagonist are now doomed to die in the ruined city, having no way to escape. Upon discovering Scintilla in the upper cistern, the protagonist has the choice of releasing her straight away. If he does so, Scintilla will attack and kill Magistrate Sentius before escaping. The protagonist is also returned to the present day and is able to leave the city with Al Worth through the exit identified by Scintilla. Charon then provides the protagonist with a tablet which confirms that Scintilla was able to escape the city and return to the land of the living. However, all the other citizens of the Forgotten City perished. The other option available to the protagonist is to let Hilarious know to gather as many people as possible and bring them to the upper cistern when the golden rule is broken. If this option is chosen, the events of Scintilla's escape play out largely the same. She kills Magistrate Sentius and the player is returned to the modern day. However, this time the stone tablet provided to the protagonist by Charon reveals that Scintilla, Octavia, Lucretia, Horatius, and Equitia were all able to escape the city. However, everyone else who was present died. Across the Forgotten City are 4 special golden statues, each representing an icon of the underworld. Once Galerius is told that the protagonist is stuck in a time loop, repeating the same day again and again, he compares the protagonist to Sisyphus, who was punished by the gods and doomed to push the same boulder up a hill again and again, with the boulder running back down the hill every time he reached the top. Galerius also notes the other statues, Tantalus, who was doomed to forever reach to a piece of fruit just out of his grasp, the Pylades, who were tasked with fetching water through a sieve, and Ixion, who was strapped to a flaming wheel for all eternity. Each of these statues is based on a real figure in Greek mythology, and viewing all of them will unlock the achievement Icons of the Underworld. The coins, which are also an important feature of the story of the Forgotten City, are also a part of Greek and Roman mythology, with both cultures having a tradition of burying the dead with coins to pay for their passage to the underworld. While the Egyptians and Sumerians did not have the same tradition, they both did bury their dead with possessions. Similarly, both Roman and Greek mythology spoke of the ferryman of the dead being Charon. In the game, the Egyptian ferryman is called Kurti, Kurti being one of the Egyptian deities who was associated with being a ferryman of the dead, along with another god, Mahaf. The story of the god of the underworld and his queen, as told in the Forbidden City, is quite different to the mythologies surrounding the Greek, Roman, Egyptian, and Sumer god and goddess of the underworld. However, the god of the underworld placing his queen in a state of suspended animation and prohibiting her from leaving is similar to the abduction myth in the Greek and Roman mythology, both of which had the god of the underworld, Hades or Pluto, abducting a young woman, Persephone or Proserpina, and forcing her to be his wife. One of the Sumer mythologies surrounding the queen of their underworld, Ashigul, is similar, though there the queen was abducted by a dragon, whereas in the Egyptian religion, Isis deeply loved Osiris and restored him to life. In some ways, it is disappointing to see the god and goddess of the underworld of these four religions reduced to little more than set pieces for the game, with little connection to the actual mythologies and religions surrounding them. However, it is an interesting twist to the game, and certainly not one that I was expecting while playing it. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. And while you're there, why not like and subscribe to my channel? And I will see you in the next video.